Hi everyone. Hope your small group is going well and that you're seeing some growth. And when I talk about growth, what I'm talking about is that you yourselves are having a sense of growing stronger with Jesus, but you're also seeing more people come and take advantage and receive benefit from gathering together. And one of the questions I'd present to you, if you haven't already thought about it, is who else needs to be there as you guys gather and talk about these things? We're into week 8, and this is the week that we will talk about chapter 6. And chapter 6 is entitled, God is Holy. When Dr. Smith, the writer of the book, the author of the book, talks about God is Holy, he talks about that there are two top narratives about God in our world. Number one is that He's wrathful. Yeah, that God is mad all the time. God is holy and the world is not, and so therefore He's angry about it. He's mad at all the sin that He sees. Another narrative, the second narrative that is sort of dominant in our world is that God doesn't care about sin. He's a cosmic spirit, a benevolent force that's above all the evil and wrong in the world. And so He never judges. He doesn't punish sin. He sends no one to hell. He's really sort of a spiritual teddy bear. Holy in that regard means that He's perfect in being warm and fuzzy. But Dr. Smith makes a note. He says a teddy bear that has nothing to say about and can do nothing about the darkness that exists in each of us and how it manifests in the brokenness in the world is really useless. Dr. Smith says in chapter 6, as he's talking about the holiness of God, he says, we need to turn to Jesus and get His view on the character of God, particularly when we have a conversation about holiness. He asks you to turn to several verses and look at what Jesus had to say as the holiness of God and how that relates to God's character. And I'm just going to mention these verses. What I'd like for you in your small group to do is go back and look these up and talk about them just a little bit. It might be helpful if you get a pen and paper. Here's the verses. John chapter 3, verse 36. John chapter 5, verse 28. Matthew 12, verses 36 and 37. Matthew 16, verse 27. And Luke 21, verse 23. Now, when you read these verses, you're going to hear words like condemnation, wrath, judgment. And so that creates a question. How do we make sense of those words, of Jesus talking about God like that, in light of Him also telling us that God is like a father who throws a party when a wayward son comes home? Integrating God's love and God's wrath, it's really hard to do, and most people don't. They simply decide to either go one way or the other. They simply decide to major on that God is love or that there is this such thing as God is wrathful. But a true picture, a true narrative of God, it won't allow you to split it like that. In Romans chapter 11, verse 22, and look this up, Paul says that God is both kind and He's severe. How Dr. Smith begins to integrate God's love and God's wrath is that he first asks us to define love and wrath as it relates to God, not as it relates to human beings. And so in doing that, he says, love is not a silly, sappy, crazy infatuation. It's a consistent desire for the good of others. He quotes Dallas Willard. Dallas Willard said that love is to will the good of another. And wrath, as we talk about wrath is, when we think about that word, we think about somebody who's just completely enraged. But when it comes to God, wrath is not a state of crazed rage where all reason and self-control has been lost. Wrath is a consistent opposition to sin and death. It is a mindful, objective, rational stance against evil. In the way that Dr. Smith says, it is really and truly an act of love. See, God is not indecisive when it comes to evil. He is fiercely and forcefully opposed to the things that destroy His precious children. His wrath is a result of His love and holiness, His love in treasuring us, and His holiness, which is a repulsion of evil. Wrath is a temporary, and that's real important that you remember that word. Wrath is a temporary response to sin and evil by a loving and holy God. Now, one of the examples he gives in the chapter of such a thing is the organization MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And he talks about how they were rational in their approach of raising public awareness. They worked very, very hard to change laws, and the result of that was they changed the culture about drunk driving. It wasn't some crazed response to evil. Now you may think of a better example of what we're trying to describe as wrath, as this mindful opposition to things that are wrong. Now, inside of that, we need to take a moment and just try to understand what it means when we say God is holy. In the book, he says that he carries the idea that God is pure purity. He's pure truth. He's pure love. He's pure grace. And so when we mix God's love and His holiness, what is it that we get? Well, George MacDonald, who was a preacher a long time ago, was preaching on Hebrews chapter 12, verse 29. In that is the phrase, God is a consuming fire. And when he was trying to define that, he said, love loves unto purity. Love loves unto purity. That's holiness. This means God is against my sin because He is for me. Now, just to end the chapter a little bit, he knows that this may raise a question about the existence of hell. So he talks about love does not demand love in return. God allows people to reject Him. Now, it's not a passive allowing. He's constantly and actively pursuing people aggressively in His love. But God will not violate the choices we make. Thus, the doors of hell are locked from the inside. It's our rejection of God that creates our separation from Him. We must first know His love and forgiveness before we can really truly understand His holiness. Otherwise, we will define His holiness wrong. And that's why the first few chapters of the book have been about love and forgiveness and grace, about God's generosity and His trustworthiness. But now in the book, we're going to be turning some corners and begin to look at some other things about God. And that's why we're raising this conversation about God's holiness. At the end of the chapter, there are some really good questions to talk through in your small group. I hope you get a chance to work through all of them. All of them are very good. And this week, you'll be practicing the soul training of margin. It's creating some downtime through your day. It's to resist this thing in our culture called hurry sickness. So I hope you have a good week and a great time together. Blessings.